Hello, everyone. This is Independent Conservative. I am Ryan Bowling. Thank you all for joining me once again. So, accordingly, it has been 17 days since Kamala Harris has been interviewed. She hasn't been interviewed for 17 days since she joined in this race. And there's a lot of controversy concerning that. So we're going to get right into this article, and I'm going to give you my opinion of why I believe that Kamala Harris is not being interviewed and asked any questions about policies or any of that. I'm going to get right into that, but let's get into this article. It's a pretty straightforward, short article, and I want you guys to hear what it has to say. But it says, Vice President Kamala Harris has not given one interview or press conference to the media in the last 17 days since she joined the presidential race. She has given a few speeches in which she has repeated the same script, first to campaign headquarters, then to party supporters in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where she introduced running mate Tim Walz on Tuesday. The article goes on to say, her only unscripted remarks came last week at Andrews Air Force Base when she joined President Joe Biden to welcome Americans who had been freed from Russia in a prisoner swap. Harris, in her characteristic style, and that's kind of prohibited, but it is characteristic, even though this piece here is opinionated by them saying characteristic, it is characteristic what I'm about to read here. This is her characteristic style. Says her characteristic style says Harris, in her characteristic style, made circular remarks about, quote, the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy. I mean, is this literally what this woman said? Let me read that again. This is apparently what she said. The importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy. How can anyone... We can go on. Republicans have taken to mocking Harris's strategy as a, quote, basement strategy, referring to the Biden campaign's attempt to keep the candidate off the campaign trail for months during 2020 because of the so-called pandemic, or scandemic, as my boy Anthony Brown Logans calls it, which is exactly what it was. But there's no small amount of frustration on the Republican side since media coverage of her candidacy has been glowing without any apparent interest on the part of journalists in asking her questions about her record or policies. And they're not going to. As Breitbart News has noted, there are no policies on Kamala Harris's campaign website yet. And that's in the article there. And I've also heard from others that on Trump's, I think it's his Truth Social site, he has listed a significant amount of his own policies and what he's trying to do. Now, I saw this, I think it was on Brandon T. Tatum's channel. And he literally showed it on his site, showed all the different policies that Trump is trying to put forth. But apparently, Kamala Harris doesn't have any on her site. Now, inevitably, the question is why? Why are, because if this is the natural processes by which someone who's going to run for the presidency are to go through in terms of journalists interviewing them and asking about their policies. If this is the natural process, because clearly it's been the natural process with Trump, clearly it's been the natural process with Vance, JB Vance. It's clearly has been the natural process with these individuals. Journalists have been asking them questions on the run. Not only of the sitting, but on the run. And they have tried their best to answer these questions the best they could, but they have answered these questions, actually, and have answered these questions, interview questions, well, in my opinion. So why not Harris? Why not Harris? She's been here 17 days. Why not? Okay? Except that little flippity nonsense, the diplomacy of the significance of the diplomacy retardation that she just supposedly said at the airport. I mean, what is that supposed to be about? Typical Kamala Harris, as it said. Well, I'm going to give you my opinion on this. And to me, it seems apparent that she's not being interviewed because if Kamala Harris gets a real sit-down interview, whether sit down, stand up, on the run, or whatever. Don't interview her on the run. If you interview her on the run, she gonna run. Okay. Woman can barely interview. She can barely interview properly sitting down, let alone on the run. But anyway, to me, it's pretty straightforward. The reason why they won't interview, the journalists would not interview Kamala Harris, and it could be by direct command from the higher ups. They don't interview her. It could be the Democrats just keeping her away from the cameras, keeping her away from journalists, whatever. It's simple to me, and that is her policies stink. If they sit and interview Kamala Harris, what are they going to, if they ask her, okay, what are you going to do about the border? What is she going to do? Well, you know what? I'm going to close it. She's not going to close the border, and most Americans don't want the border wide open. The only people that care about this stuff with the borders being open is Kamala Harris, her VP pick, who are both so far left is retarded, and the activist groups, the radical activist groups in this country that want communism. They're the only ones that want this, but they are the minority. They're not the majority of Americans. They're the only ones that want this retardation, this foolishness. So if she were to be interviewed, these questions ought to be asked. And if they're going to be asked, Kamala Harris is going to be caught in a twizzle manizzle dizzle vizzle, because she's going to have to answer that. And what is she going to say? Well, I think that everyone should have an opportunity to come here. We're not talking about whether or not people should have an opportunity to come here, Kamala, Chameleon, whatever your name is. We're talking about legal. Are they coming here legally? If they're not coming here legally, what's there to argue about? She won't be able to answer that. Amidst all this crazy stuff in the schools, pushing these radical sexual things on our kids in schools, she's all in support for. So what I believe is the media and the Democrats are keeping her away from journalists and getting people riled up emotionally. Hey, she's the first. If she gets elected, she'll be the first woman of color. They played off the idea she's black. She's not black. She'll be the first woman of color and be the first female as the president. That's what they're playing off of. But that's not policies. That's emotion. Emotion. There's a difference between emotion and policies. And what these Democrats, what I see is the Democrats are those who controlling the whole thing, if you will, is an emotional push. They're getting everybody to side with, or trying to get everyone to side with Kamala Harris based on emotion, based on her being a female and based on her being a person of color. But my thing is like this: how can anyone, and that still bothers me. I know people, we all have had this. I used to be this way before, but when I look back at how I was then and how I am now, it's hard for me to believe I was that unthinking, but I was. So inevitably, it comes down to, I said in the last video, common sense. Common sense. They're not going to interview her, and they don't plan on interviewing her because her policies are so terrible and so far left that most people that hear the interview are going to be like, wait a minute, or watch the interview, going to be like, man, I don't know about that. I don't know. They're going to start questioning whether or not they should vote for Kamala. Because right now, as I said, they're operating on the emotional aspect. They're operating on her being a female, and they're operating on her being a person of color. That's what they're operating on. And every time this woman talks, I want to just say, shut the HELL up, because you're not talking about something. Diplomacy and the importance of diplomacy. What the heck is you talking about? Most Americans that's listening to that, could they decipher what she's saying? The diplomacy of the diplomacy of the diplomacy here and diplomacy there. We got to understand diplomacy. In order to understand diplomacy, we got to expand diplomacy, and understand it, expand diplomacy. We got to walk on diplomacy, and understand to walk on diplomacy. We got to lay on diplomacy. I mean, what are you talking about? Y'all, I'm being sarcastic, but you get the point. What the HELL is this woman talking about? Not a single doggone thing that has anything to do with policies. Policies. I'm going to say that until I'm speaking in tongues, because that's what the issue is. And this is what I believe they're doing. She's not going to say anything. And when she does finally do an interview, it'll be a marked out interview. It'll be pre-planned interview. All the questions will be planned. All the answers will be planned. Okay. And they're going to avoid the real issues that's hurting America. They're going to avoid that. I guarantee you they're going to avoid it as long as I'm sitting here. They're going to avoid it. They're going to avoid the real issues that most Americans are dealing with. Okay? It's over 300 million people in this freaking country. I don't even count kids or whatever the case is. But those that can vote, out of those of at the age of voting, we say 200 million of them are at the age of voting. That's a doggone lot of people. And it's hard for me to believe that out of the 200 million people that are that out of the 300 million, the 200 million that are eligible to vote, it's hard for me to believe that they support much of anything that Kamala Harris has to say in terms of policies. Once again, it's policies that's going to dictate the course of the country, not whether or not she's a female, not whether or not she's a woman of color. They're going to focus, if they get elected, they're going to focus on things, they win the presidency rather, they're going to focus on things that are so far left that most Americans are going to they're going to turn away from. So, yeah, I mean, and I can understand the Republicans argument about this. Like, look, you know, they're calling it basement politics, basement procedures, whatever, tactics, you know, and that's what Biden did. Biden sat in the basement all the way through, and then people, and here's the deal. Biden sat in the basement, if you will, was hardly did any campaigning. Meanwhile, the mainstream media, which was in bed with him, giving him lap dances and all the rest, making this man look like the best person in the world. Oh, this is what we need. And also focusing on hating on Trump. You got to get Trump out of there. Oh, my God, orange man bad. We got to get this man out of here. He is the next Hitler. Oh, Jesus. Ha. We got to get him out. They was literally preaching about how evil Trump was. So people fell for the woo-woo, voted for Biden. Now they're catching hell. Good. You need to catch it. Because maybe perhaps, I'm not saying anyone here, but good, you need to catch it. Because maybe perhaps you see how goofy it was for you to vote for this man based on emotion alone and not policies. Good. I got my blessing. I'm going to get my blessing regardless of who gets in. Because God is my leader. He's my father. He controls my destiny. Not Trump, not any of these others. But I tell you this one thing. I tell you this. Voting does matter. And when people vote blindly and vote off of emotion and gender and not factual data and not policies, it makes things a whole lot harder for just regular thinking Americans. But that's what I had to say about that. That's the reason why she's not going to be interviewed at this point. The mainstream media is going to continue to avoid her, whether by direct command or whatever. They're going to continue to avoid her, or she's going to continue to avoid them. It's going to be that way. But Trump and Vance, man, they answer questions back. It's amazing, man. I just hope people wake up to this. I just hope people use common sense. Please, vote. I hope American people use common sense. Please. Lord, help them use common sense. I know common sense ain't common, but oh, God, help them, Jesus, to use common sense. Like, really, bro. That's what I had to say about that. What do you guys think about Kamala Harris not being interviewed? I want to do an interview for 17 days. I almost said 17 years. 17 days since she's been running for this now. What do you think the issue might be? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. God bless you all, and see you again.